Hi everyone, I'm Luca Pedrelli and this is ScalarField, my game prototype. It's been almost a year since the last update, and if you've seen my previous videos, you're probably noticing that the game looks quite different now. Well, not only the game looks different, it also works differently, and I'm here today to explain you how and why. Now, before we start, a brief introduction for those of you who are new to my channel. ScalarField is a top-down game, as you can see. It's an RPG with magic. The player can cast spells like fireballs, cold winds, ice wall, etc. And it features a tactical pause, meaning that the player can pause the gameplay at any time, study the situation, cue actions for its character, and then resume gameplay and see the consequence of its action unravel. It's an hybrid approach between a fully paused combat system, like Baldur's Gate 1, and a real-time Dota 1, like League of Legends, for example. The most crucial aspect of the game, however, is that differently from other RPGs, in ScalarField magic interacts with the environment in a more intuitive and physically accurate way. What do I mean? I'm not gonna go over all the spells, as explained them in the previous video, but essentially I built a thermodynamic simulation within the game so that by casting spells, the player and the AI can change the temperature of the environment and the entities in it. In particular, the game features heat transmission. Heat flows from hot bodies to cold bodies in order to reach thermal equilibrium. Characters take damage based on their temperature being outside of an interval of comfort, and the most powerful spells can be cast only when the caster is above or below a certain temperature. The way thermodynamics works is that each actor has a component called the thermodynamics interactor component. The interactor is associated with one or more simple collision shapes, spheres, boxes, capsules, with a custom collision channel. Let's take a look at a simple example. In this picture we have three actors. A mage casting a fireball at this tree on the right. The thermodynamics colliders are placed so that they roughly match the shape of their actor. As you can see, the fireball's sphere collider, in orange, is overlapping one of the three colliders, the green spherical one. This means that this frame, this moment in time, the fireball and the tree will interact. The fireball will get colder by transmitting heat to the tree, which in turn will get hotter. Vice versa, the mage's capsule collider is not overlapping other colliders, meaning that they won't interact this frame, preserving their temperature. Now, I won't get into the nitty-gritty details of how the code drives the actor-to-actor interaction. I want to keep things nice and simple here. I'll just mention that the formula I derived, which expresses the temperature gradient in terms of time, works under the assumption of small time intervals. This is why we have to apply it every frame. Moreover, the temperature variation of an interactor depends on the current temperature of the other ones overlapping it. However, a real engine takes components one at a time. This means that I must wait for all the interactors of the world to tick before updating their temperatures. Otherwise, some interactors would read the future temperatures of others, making the simulation collapse after a bunch of ticks. So, we have seen the basic idea behind the system. However, the thermodynamic interactions I described so far require things to be really close, while in reality bodies can exchange heat even without touching, right? If you're in a room with a radiator on, for example, the radiator will warm you up without the need of touching you. That's because of air. The radiator first warms the air inside the room, and then it's the air that, by touching you, increases your temperature. Before this update, what I used to do to simulate air was to set up a grid of non-physical and independent particle actors covering the entire game level. This way, every real actor in the world, in our example the radiator and the person, ended up overlapping with at least one air particle, exchanging heat with it. Moreover, each particle collider was set up to overlap with the neighboring particles, causing particle-particle interactions carrying heat between non-touching actors. Here is a snippet from my previous ScalarField video showing how this setup looked like. Now, this system worked fine for small levels like the ones I'm dealing with right now. However, there was a major problem with it. Having many actors in the level ticking each frame is really bad performance-wise, and to avoid dropping frames I was forced to either use very few particle actors, making the simulation and the heat visualization worse, or creating small maps, making the game design options very limited. To overcome these limits, I spent the last few months reworking the system so that instead of many independent particle actors, the game has a single extra actor, representing a grid of cells. This is a huge improvement, since we are reducing the amount of ticking actors in our scene by orders of magnitude. The grid always ticks after all the real interactors, thanks to the fact that it belongs to a different tick group, and during its tick, each interactor now performs two kinds of interactions. The ones with other overlapping interactors, which we already described, and the interaction with the grid. Let's see how it works. Here is a top view of our map, where we have our two-dimensional grid. Let's assume we have two interactors, this green circular one on the right, for example a tree, and this blue rectangular one on the left, for example an ice wall. For each collider of each interactor, we loop over all the cells intersecting the bounding box of the collider, these yellow ones, and for each thoroughly overlapping cell, the orange ones, we apply the temperature gradient formula on both the cell and the interactor associated with the collider. The cell doesn't immediately update its temperature because once every single interactor ticked, the grid also ticks to perform what I call a self-interaction. We loop over all the cells of the grid and make each cell interact with its orthogonally adjacent ones. This is how I make the heat flow in the environment so that non-overlapping interactors can still interact with each other. Once the self-interaction is done, the grid can update its temperature values by swapping the cell temperatures computed this frame with the ones of the previous frame, following the well-known double buffer pattern. This is all the thermodynamic system does in one frame. All the iterations over the grid are very cache-friendly, as the memory occupied by the grid is contiguous. Therefore, this is a very fast procedure, allowing me to have a much more detailed air representation and bigger maps without losing frames. Let's close the video by briefly explaining how the thermodynamics system uses colors to communicate the temperature. For normal actors, things are really simple. Each actor with a thermodynamics interactor component holds as a second component, called thermodynamics presenter. The presenter listens for temperature variations on the interactor, maps the value to a color on a scale that goes from dark blue to purple red, and sends the color value to one of the actor mesh materials. For the grid actor, things are a bit more complex, as the grid is not a mesh rendered in the game world. In particular, the grid is associated to a texture that has a pixel for each cell. Each frame, a component on the grid actor called heatmap presenter updates the color of each pixel of the texture according to the corresponding cell's temperature. All the meshes that are part of the ground apply, on their top face, a material that has this texture as parameter, and each ground mesh shows only a section of the texture, since its UVs, the part of the original texture to start from, are computed according to this formula, where texture offset represents the bottom left of the map and texture dimensions represent the dimension of the map. The net result is that the ground of our map shows our air grid as a heat map updating in real time. This informs the player on which areas are safe and which are too cold or too hot to stand into. Alright, this is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to check out my repository, you can find a link in the description of the video. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments.